Hey everyone, welcome to Singularity Computers Client Build 22 Part 8. This is the final part of the build log. We're going to start this video by installing the lighting, then finally I'm going to move on to the test results. So you can see I'm in the process of experimenting with the lighting, and this is why I always leave it until last, because you're not going to get good positions for the lighting until all of the components are installed. This is probably one of the hardest builds I've ever installed lighting for, particularly considering that this is UV reactive coolant and I'm installing UV lighting, because the positions of UV lighting are even more important if you want a good UV effect. Because of this open case design, there is just nowhere to install LED strips, and some of you are probably thinking just stick them anywhere, but if you're going to do lighting properly, you should never be able to see the light source. You should only be able to see a glow or reflection. And that is one of the reasons that I don't like to use LEDs. A lot of people ask me why I don't use LEDs in my water blocks. Well, there are actually three reasons. Number one, the light source, as I mentioned, and I have some 3mm UV LEDs installed into this water block, and you can certainly see the light source. Number two, I don't like the cable mess. And number three, they're usually quite ineffective. And you can see they're hardly having an effect on this water block at all. But I still might have to break that rule and use LEDs in this build because I really have nothing else I can do. So even for the small effect that they do have, it might be one of the only things that I can actually do for lighting in this build. Anyone who knows my builds well will know that over the past few years, I've pretty much only used Darkside lighting and nothing else. And that is because this lighting is just incredible. I mean, let's take a look at the unique design of this PCB. I mean, first of all, it is a PCB. This is not a flexible LED strip. And I really like it. I love the form factor. It's small and compact. It fits anywhere. It's just awesome lighting. And these LEDs are actually high quality Japanese LEDs used in luxury cars. The PCB is actually aluminium instead of composite. Very high quality. Everything that has been chosen for these LED strips is of the highest quality. They're absolutely amazing, and it shows because the colors, the brightness, the UV is by far the best UV I have ever used. I mean, it's just amazing. It's perfectly tuned to get the best possible UV reaction. I mean, I still need to add UV dye to this loop. I've hardly added any at this point, yet still you can see it's probably 10 times what I've seen with other UV lighting. So it's absolutely awesome. It's my favorite lighting by far, which is why I always use it. But it's just everything about it is perfect. The adhesive, I mean, one of the problems I've always had with LED strips is they fall down. I'm sure you've seen this before, but with the adhesive and how lightweight these things are, they never fall down. I've never had a Darkside LED strip fall down. The cable options are just amazing. Often with lighting, you'll end up with a single restrictive option, or you have to do custom cables, and not everyone wants to spend days and days on custom cables. So Darkside has a modular design, so you can see the small connector here, which allows you to use any one of their, I don't even know how many options there are, but there's only a few of them actually here. But we have Molex to one light, we have 3-pin to one light, a big extension, a small extension, a splitter, Molex pass-through to one light, PWM pass-through to two lights, and we have just, it goes on and on. There's a triple splitter here, 3-pin to triple splitter, which I'm using for the LEDs. Just an awesome amount of cables, enough for any build, any possible configuration, multiple LED strips, LEDs, whatever you're running. And Darkside also has a lot of other different cables. I have a 3-pin and 4-pin fan splitter there. So the LED strips, they come in all different colors. They come in UV and they come in RGB. So here I have one of the RGB controllers, and you can do anything with this thing. I mean, flashing, different brightness, all the different colors, even UV. You can see that it's quite compact, easy to hide anywhere on your build. But just take a look at this. This is one of the green LED strips. it's bright enough to light up an entire build, just one LED strip, and the color is just so vibrant. So I think some of you will have noticed that what I'm doing on the SingularityComputers store is getting a collection of my favorite products. And this is how we fund the channel and help other small water cooling businesses to survive and grow. As you can see, I'm in the process of doing the testing for this build, and while I'm doing that, I'm working on finalizing the lighting. And you can see that so far I've only managed to light up a very small part of the loop, and actually even this has been quite challenging because I've had to install LED strips in positions that I never normally would. So far I've installed two Darkside 30cm UV LED strips, and I've actually installed them one underneath each graphics card, which I don't really like, but there's nowhere else to install them, and it actually works out quite well because the LED strips are only slightly longer than the graphics cards, and due to the design of the LED strips, you can't actually see the light source from the side. You have to get right down underneath to see the light source. So now there are still a few major areas that need to be lit. This area here, which is probably going to be the biggest challenge, and obviously the reservoir, but I have something in mind for that, but also this area here. Now, if I had some of the shorter Darkside LED strips, I'm pretty sure they come in 70mm, it would be ideal for this build because I would install a little shroud attached to the power supply mount here, and I would stick an LED strip down the side of the power supply here. The shroud would cover it up and it would light up this entire area. For the monoblock up here, I would install one of the shorter LED strips across the bottom here facing upwards. It would light up the monoblock, the tubes and everything. But I don't have any of those in stock, and it would take me at least 2 weeks. I only have until tomorrow and this build is going to be shipped. So what I might do is send a few things to the customer separately later, but I think that what I have in mind for the reservoir might solve all of the problems. Now, I could just install an LED strip down the side of the radiator here, but you're definitely going to be able to see the light source. So I have a small mod in mind, which is definitely going to light up the reservoir bare minimum. But it might also bring a bit of light across to this area here and also the lower area. I've just used my guillotine folder roller to cut out a piece of 1mm aluminium panel, and I've also put a 90-degree bend in it. So I've drilled a hole at each end, which is obviously for mounting, and this is what I'm going to use to hide the lighting. So I'm going to be able to install one, maybe even two LED strips onto this piece of aluminium. Now, I'm not actually going to paint it because the silver suits the build anyway, and I don't have another 48 hours to paint and then wait for dry time. You know, it's just such a small piece and it's going to look fine. You can see that having the right tools for the job makes things incredibly easy, and it really opens up the possibilities. It's surprising how little I actually use my guillotine folder roller because not many people want extreme mods. So it's not often that I actually get to use it. But anyway, let's get this panel installed. So you can now see what I'm going for with this panel. It's basically just a little shroud and mounting position for the lighting, where it's going to be nice and close to the reservoir, so it's definitely going to light up the reservoir beautifully. And the light source is also going to be out of sight, so it's going to be just ideal. So it fits perfectly, it all lines up nicely, and you can see I have just a little gap at the back there to install the LED strip. As you can see, the lighting has worked beautifully for the reservoir, obviously as we had planned, but it really hasn't done anything for the rest of the loop. The thing is, I'm never somebody who likes to light up a build like a Christmas tree. I don't like to light up an entire build. I like to have contrast with the lighting, lit areas and dark areas, so that you can actually see that it's the coolant that is glowing, that it's not just the color of the coolant. I know that's kind of obvious, but it could just be the color of the coolant to some people, and if they don't see that contrast where some parts of it are blue and some parts of it are clear, they're just not going to know. And I really like that. I like that the loop changes, that it's clear in some sections and blue in others. It really makes you wonder, for somebody who didn't know about the UV reactive coolant and the UV lighting, how it's actually done. But I would like to light up a little bit more. The thing is, without those shorter LED strips that I mentioned, and without more time, it's just not going to be possible. So what I'm going to do is send the customer 2 short LED strips, one to stick onto the power supply there, and one to stick under this water block. And that should finish it off nicely. I really would like to see it all finish off and be able to film it and photograph it, but sometimes it's just not possible. Time is more important. I covered the water cooling loop, the tubing routing and the fittings in the last part of the build log, but we haven't yet taken a look at what I've done with the custom wiring. So let's take a look, starting down here at the power supply. Now, this cable routing hole actually worked out very well. The cables only just fit. I could probably have fit one more cable through that hole and that would have been it. But if the power supply was any longer, that cable routing hole would have been in the wrong position. So if it was an AX1500i, for example, well, it wouldn't be compatible at all. And that's a problem that you see right across this case. Take a look at the bottom here, for example. We have a single cable routing hole in the middle. Well, there should be 3 of them, because what I've had to do with the cables is really, a little ridiculous down here. You can see all of that cable mess, which was unavoidable. And no, I couldn't run it underneath the motherboard. There's just not enough space. I really like the way the PCIe ended up working out. Now, I'd prefer a vertical routing. It is cleaner. But just the way things worked out with pretty much because of this case, because of the bad placement of the cable routing holes, I had to curve the 24-pin down and around like this. And I do sometimes like doing this. It creates more surface area. It creates a little bit of a feature, a curve in the build where you don't often see curves. So this kind of matches that, and I'm really happy with the way it's worked out. And also the 8-pin EPS and 4-pin ATX kind of matches it as well. But due to the cable routing holes, you can see that I've had to, this one should be a lot bigger. It should be closer to the corner. There should be more options and bigger cable routing holes down this side. You can also see what I've done with the USB 3. They're always difficult. Even though this one comes straight off the side of the board, it was still difficult. But you can hardly see it where it is, so I'm pretty happy with it. And then down here, the fans, as always, I've just run all of the fan wiring down the side of the fans and cable tied it all to the bolts that are holding the fans in position. And then I've gone out the back there. That actually needs to be cleaned up just a little bit. There we go. And then you can see the cable here for the Darkside LED strip. This one here. And then the cables for the Darkside LED strips underneath the graphics cards, I've just routed into the PCIe wiring where it's nicely hidden. And I've connected both of those to the motherboard, whereas the other LED strip I've run around the back, and we'll take a look at that now. So you can see just how clean the custom wiring has ended up in this build. There's hardly any wiring back here at all. And this is mostly due to the fact that the only storage in this build is M.2s, but I also really do like the cable routing design back here. I mean, first of all, you have heaps of space for cables. I mean, you have enough space back here to run the loop if you wanted to. And that is something you could really do. I was considering it for this build actually, but you can see we just have the 24 pin and the PCIe running through the middle here, held in position nicely by the wall mount. And I was just able to run them in a single bundle because there's so much space back here. But, you know, I could have actually sat all of this wiring a lot more flat, but there's no need to because of the amount of space back here. And I don't like to go using all kinds of cable management components unless I really have to. But you can see for the 8-pin EPS and 4-pin ATX, I've used some ModSmart cable management components. Nice and clean in the corner there. And this is just for the pump RPM running to the CPU fan header. And down here we have a single peripheral running the pump, all of the fans, and also one LED strip which I've added to the end because that is a Mod My Toys Molex to 5 3-pin splitter. The messiest cables here are the front panel cables. And, you know, I hardly ever end up customizing these to length because a lot of the time they're so close to being the correct length anyway. In this build there was a lot of extra length. You can see that they go right down and back up again. So if I had to customize them to length, they would have just gone, you know, straight across, then down. Hardly any difference at all, and pretty much a day's work doing that, mainly considering the USB 3, which has a huge amount of very fine wires which are very hard to customize. I should add that if this was my build, or if it was up to me, this is as far as I would go with the lighting. And I know some of you are going to agree, some of you are going to very strongly disagree, but I've mentioned many times previously what I like to do with lighting. I don't like to flood the build, I like to have contrast, light and dark areas. Now, granted, this here is a major feature. It should be a lit area, but so is the reservoir, and actually the way the lighting is right now kind of creates balance, because if you look at the shape of the loop, it's kind of generally shaped, well, it's across this way, and the lighting is across the other way. So to me, it's kind of balanced, and I really like that contrast from light to dark, and as I've mentioned, showing that it's actually the coolant that is glowing. And you know, for some parts of the loop it's blue, some parts it's transparent. It's really good to be able to see those differences in a single loop. For almost every system I build, the customer asks for an overclock. And what that means is that I have to do the leak test, the stability test, and the leak test I usually do about 12 hours, stability test 3 days. And then I have to move on to more stability testing to test the overclock. So it does take a fair bit of extra time. And depending on how far I push the overclock, obviously the more I push it, the longer it's going to take. So usually I just go for a kind of middle of the road, moderate overclock. Otherwise I have to spend, you know, a week or more doing it. Because if you're really going to push the components, you do have to put in a lot of time, there's no doubt about it. I always enjoy overclocking. You know, it's what I started with when I first came into this interest. It's the reason I started water cooling. I love it. But every now and then, you come across, I mean, it's because of the silicon lottery, but sometimes you get a golden chip and it's just amazing. You have so much fun with it. But this system was just one of those where the CPU was just not up to standard. I couldn't push it very far at all. And the graphics cards weren't that great either. So I wasn't entirely happy with the results I ended up with, but that is the silicon lottery. That is what you get. Every now and then you're going to come across, subpar overclocks. I don't know, it could have been other things. It might not be that. It could just be that the current BIOS for this motherboard is not that great. I don't know. I have the latest BIOS installed, of course, as always. But yeah, I'm sure it probably could be sorted out with future BIOS updates. Let's hope. But I ended up with 4.7 gigahertz for the CPU at 1.4 volts. And the memory at its XMP profile of 2400 megahertz, 14, 16, 16, 31, 1.2 volts. And the graphics cards, I went 75 megahertz over on the core, 110 megahertz over on the memory, and maximum power limit, and also plus 10 millivolts on the core. So let's take a look at the performance and temperature results. So you can see the performance gains from the overclocks weren't that great, but it's what I was expecting with the overclocks that I achieved. Something that I did notice about this build, which is just awesome, is the performance of the Samsung 950 Pro M.2s. Absolutely incredible how fast the installs went. As I was installing benchmarks, it was just, a couple of seconds for each install. Just amazing how much more productive you can be with performance like that. I almost forgot to talk about the temperatures, which for this build, because of the parallel configuration, were incredibly important. As I mentioned, this loop was a little bit experimental. I wasn't 100% sure how it was going to turn out, but I was, 95% sure. And sure enough, the temperatures were excellent. The performance of this loop is very good. Any loss of flow is just not having an effect. But actually the air bubble that I had, somebody left a comment on the last video with an air bubble in the exact same position in their monoblock, and they had a very small loop in series with a D5. So it's a common occurrence, as I mentioned. But that sums up this build log, and as always, it's been a lot of fun. I have a lot of monster water-cooled systems coming up, which I'm really looking forward to. So thanks for watching, and remember that none of this would be possible without our patrons.